We're continuing our adventures with the Apostle Paul in the book of Acts. So hopefully you picked up your study sheet on the way in. If you didn't, there's still some out there probably. So you can grab one of those. We're in Acts chapter 25, and I thought for sure I had that marked, but we'll play sword drill tonight. It's in the New Testament, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts. Got it, right here. There's probably a little song that tells me about where it is. All right. So, let's kind of recap where we are. Paul ends up in Jerusalem after his third missionary journey comes to its conclusion. So he's in Jerusalem. There's a huge misunderstanding that takes place. Some men see Paul going into the temple with some men that Jews that he's paying their money, their vow, the offering for their vow that they had made. And these people see Paul going in the temple, and they automatically assume that he has brought Gentiles into the temple, and they say, this is horrible, how can we stand such atrocity? And so they cause this big riot, and the Roman tribune, Claudius Lysias, he goes and basically arrests Paul apparently more for Paul's safety than anything else, and to try to find out what is going on and why this riot has taken place. So the Jews make their case. It looks very much like the trial of Jesus, where they have a lot of trumped up charges and false accusations. Anyway, so Paul, very much like in the trial of Jesus, where Jesus is taken from the Jews to Pilate, to Herod, back to Pilate, and so it's this back and forth thing. We kind of see the same thing with Paul. Paul is, originally arrested by Claudius Lysias to kind of rescue him from the Jews. He's then put on trial kind of before the Jews. He's then transferred from Jerusalem to Caesarea Maritime, where he appears before the Roman governor Felix. Now, Felix, I guess, let's see, did he die? 2 years. It just says he was succeeded. So, after 2 years, Felix is replaced by Festus. And don't get gun smoke in your head. It's hard for me. Some names are just corrupted for me forever. But Festus takes Felix's place as governor. And so that's kind of where chapter 25 picks up, is Festus is now in power. Paul is still in prison in Caesarea Maritime, and Felix is wanting to get to the bottom of this, and you still have the Jews who are still wanting something done. They're still wanting Paul killed, put to death. And Felix feels like he's kind of come in, Festus kind of feels like he's coming in, flat-footed. He doesn't really understand what's going on, and so a lot of 25 is him trying to figure out what in the world is going on and what am I supposed to do with this character, Paul. All right, let's take a look. We're in verse 1 of Acts 25. Now, when Festus had come to the province, after 3 days he went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem. Then the high priest and the chief men of the Jews informed him against Paul, and they petitioned him, asking a favor against him, that he would summon him to Jerusalem while they lay in ambush along the road to kill him. But Festus answered that Paul would be kept in Caesarea and that he himself was going there shortly. Therefore he said, let those who have authority among you go down with me and accuse this man to see if there's any fault in him. And when he had remained among them more than 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. And the next day, sitting on the judgment seat, he commanded Paul to be brought. When he had come, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood about and laid many serious complaints against Paul, which they could not prove, while he answered for himself, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I offended anything at all. But Festus, wanting to do the Jews a favor, answered Paul and said, Are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and there be judged before me concerning these things? So Paul said, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat where I ought to be judged. To the Jews I've done no wrong, as you very well know, for if I'm an offender or have committed anything deserving of death, I do not object to dying, but if there is nothing in these things of which these men accuse me, no one can deliver me to them. I appeal to Caesar. Then Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, You have appealed to Caesar you shall go. All right, let's talk about this. So, Festus comes to power. Paul has been in prison in Caesarea this whole time. All right, so after a few days, Festus goes down to Jerusalem, and there he meets the Jews. And what's the first thing the Jews say? We want justice done for Paul. We want you to put him to death. We want you to give us a favor and bring him to Jerusalem. They had the idea of killing him. Now, he'd been in jail for 2 years, yet this case of Paul is still fresh on their minds. So what does this tell you about Paul's witness? Well, yeah, I mean, for one thing it tells me is he never quit preaching. He still witnessed from prison in Caesarea. And his witness apparently was strong enough that they were hearing about it back in Jerusalem. Man, I want to be that kind of guy, that you can throw me in jail in Caesarea and I'm still witnessing to the point that people in Jerusalem are hearing about the results of it. And it also tells us what? That it was so effective that after 2 years, it hadn't burned out. That Paul was making such an impact that the Jews hated him so that even after 2 years, they still hadn't gotten over it. They were still mad about it. You can sometimes tell how effective you are for the Lord by how mad the world is at you. How long the world stays mad will give you a good indication of how effective you've been for Christ, it would seem. Now, Festus says to Paul, Festus says to Paul, are you willing to go to Jerusalem and stand trial in front of your accusers? And Paul says, I'm not going to Jerusalem. He said, if I've done anything deserving of death, then I'm not, then I'm willing to die. But if there's nothing to this, and you know very well there isn't, Festus, then nobody has a right to hand me over to them. I'm appealing to Caesar. Now, it would seem that Festus was more than willing to move the trial to Jerusalem from Caesarea. Why? Do what? So you're right, he wanted to do a favor to the Jews. Seems to be a big part of it. And possibly he thought he could better ascertain the truth in Jerusalem. Festus really doesn't know what's going on. He inherits Paul, basically. Paul is a problem to Festus that he inherited from Felix. So he doesn't really know. Paul has been passed around. It started in Jerusalem. Claudius Lysias was the arresting officer, but it moves from him to Caesarea. And Felix, now Festus has come to power. He's got this prisoner Paul. He's got a whole bunch of people mad at him, but he doesn't know why. He knows that whatever happened apparently happened in Jerusalem, and it involved in some way the Jewish religious law. So perhaps he thought, if we can get him back to Jerusalem where it happened, and let him, appear before the religious leaders, then maybe they can better explain, and I'll have a better understanding of what the charge is and what they're so mad about. But primarily, you're right. It was that he wanted to do a favor for the Jews. Now, Paul says, I'm not going to Jerusalem. Instead, I'm going to appeal to Caesar. Now, why did he refuse to go to Jerusalem and instead opt for an appeal to Caesar? Yes, sir. Exactly. So he had that. So he's a Roman citizen. He's already revealed that much. So he's kind of got that trump card that he can play when necessary. He seems to understand that he's not going to get a fair trial in Jerusalem. He seems to understand that, he's already saw the kind of trial that Jesus got in Jerusalem. He doesn't expect any more of a fair trial for himself. Now, there's no guarantee he's going to get a fair trial in Rome either, but it was worth a shot, he thought. Also, what is Paul's long-term goal, ambition-wise? Where is he wanting to go and as a missionary? Where is he wanting to go to witness? Rome. He's made that statement in letters before. I intend to go to Rome. I want to go to Rome. Okay. It's a long and expensive trip from Jerusalem to Rome. Here's how God's going to orchestrate that. Now, you think our God isn't good? Here's how God's going to do it. If God is going to give Paul an opportunity to go to Rome and witness in Rome, and he's going to make the Roman government pay for it. Isn't that cool? That's our God. Paul is going to get an all-expense paid trip to Rome to do missions in Rome, and the Roman government is going to pay for it. So that's how God works there. Now, he says, I appeal to Caesar. Now, this is, okay, I've got a tricky trivia question for you that I'm going to catch some people on, and it'll be fun that we can kind of talk through this together. Here's my trivia question. Who is the Caesar that Paul is appealing to? Somebody said it. Nero. That's correct. Nero. If you look at dates and all of that, Nero would be the Caesar that's in power at that time. Now, if you look at, let me find it again here. I may have gone. It may be in our next set of verses. Look at 25, maybe. Okay, look at 25. This is Festus talking to Agrippa, which Agrippa will come on the scene in the next set of verses that or maybe the last set of verses we read. He says this, when I found that he had, I'm reading from New King James, when I found that he had committed nothing deserving of death, and he himself have appealed to Augustus, I decided to send him. Now, King James and New King James say Augustus here. So, is it Nero or is it Augustus? No one wants to play my game with me? Huh? Augustus. So King James and New King James. I think the NASB probably has emperor. NIV, I think, probably has something like emperor. Okay. Okay, so So here is the potential confusion, and here's the explanation of it, okay? When you hear Caesar Augustus, what do you automatically think? Think of the Christmas story, right? These were the days of Caesar Augustus, Luke chapter 2. You hear it read every Christmas time, right? Okay, what you have to remember is Augustus was a title. Right? And so the Emperor Octavian was, I believe, the first to carry the title Augustus. And so Octavian is the Augustus of Luke chapter 2 in the Christmas story. The term Augustus, it means something like reverenced one or something to that effect. It's a term of honor. So it's very much like for King of England, you say, His Majesty. So to say which Caesar was Augustus is very much like saying, well, which king is His Majesty? Well, they all kind of were. It depends on which one you're talking about. So here's where the confusion comes in. In the original language, in the Greek, and I'm giving you way more information than you probably wanted, but I love finding these little conundrums and then solving the mystery, so we can go away and wow our friends at dinner parties, right? With all the trivial Bible knowledge we know. In the original language, the Greek term, it translates emperor. Okay, so the translations that have emperor are probably the most correct literal translation of the word. The King James and the New King James aren't wrong in assigning the term Augustus, because it's a reference to the emperor, which Augustus was another title for the emperor. But you just need to understand, we're not talking about Caesar Augustus from the Christmas story. We're talking about Caesar. And how do I know that? Okay, because Caesar Augustus from the Christmas story, Octavian, died in 14 AD. We're now at about 60 AD, so it's well past when Octavian would have been alive. If you do the dates and do the math and all of that, the Caesar in power would have been Nero. Now that's a big deal, because who was one of the cruelest emperors and the one who was cruelest to Christians throughout the Roman history? Nero was kind of, he would definitely make the top three, So anyway, that's more than you ever wanted to know about that. But now the next time you're playing Bible trivia, you can wow your friends, right? All right. So do you think it was a good... Now we've already talked about how mean Nero was. Do you think it was a wise decision for Paul to appeal to Caesar? He did tell him that, yes. Well, or God could have done it whether or not he appealed to Caesar. But it got him where he wanted to go. Yeah, right. It would seem that even though Nero was cruel and corrupt, Paul had nothing to lose. I mean, because if he went to Jerusalem, he was going to die. If he stayed in Caesarea, he was probably going to die. So might as well get a trip to Rome out of the deal. And by going, he did get a chance to witness in Rome at Rome's expense. So, I mean, it seemed like the best option at the time. Questions or comments on those verses? And all along the way, and shipwrecks and bitten by snakes, and yes, sir. Yes, Caesar was just a title. Exactly. So who would our Caesar be? Joe Biden, our president, for at least another 2 years. That's right. All right. Let's look on then to verse 13. 13. At midday, oh, wait a minute. I'm in the wrong chapter. That's the wrong, wait a minute. What translation are you reading from, Brother Mark? All right, 13. After some days, King Agrippa and Bernice came to Caesarea to greet Festus. And when they had been there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, there is a certain man left a prisoner by Felix, about whom the chief priests and elders of the Jews informed me when I was in Jerusalem asking for a judgment against him. To them I answered, it is not the custom of the Romans to deliver any man to destruction before the accused meets the accusers face to face and has opportunity to answer for himself concerning the charge against him. Therefore, when they had come together without any delay, the next day I sat on the judgment seat and commanded the man to be brought in. And when the accusers stood up, they brought no accusation against him of such things as I suppose, but had some questions against him about their own religion and about a certain Jesus who had died, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. I love that state. That's one of those great verses right there. Because I was uncertain of such questions, I asked whether he was willing to go to Jerusalem and there be judged concerning these matters. But when Paul appealed to be reserved for the decision of Augustus, we see that right there, I commanded him to be kept till I could send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I also would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you shall hear him. Or tomorrow, he said, you shall hear him. I think I got the emphasis of that sentence wrong, but anyway. Okay, so finally, Agrippa shows up. King Agrippa. Now, tell me who is King Agrippa and what is his jurisdiction as compared to Felix's jurisdiction? Who is this King Agrippa? He is king of Judea, and who's he kin to? Herod the Great. So he's Herod the Great's great-grandson. He is the great-grandson of Herod the Great. He is ruler of, actually not so much Judea. He is over area around Galilee, but not Jerusalem. He's not over Jerusalem. He has authority over the Jews in religious matters. He has the authority to appoint the high priest. So you see, he has quite a bit of power. And he has authority in religious matters, although he does not rule Jerusalem. Festus, on the other hand, is a Roman governor, and he has authority over legal matters. So here's the conundrum. Here's the rub, if you will. And this is why it's important to Felix to get to the bottom of what exactly is the charges. Because if it's a matter of Jewish law and Jewish religion, then to him it's a matter for Agrippa to handle. But if it's a matter of Paul breaking Roman law, then that's something that he, as the governor, would take care of. So there's almost, we almost have too many chiefs and not enough Indians in the story here. So, do what? Well, right. I mean, and that's so Felix is very much trying to figure out, is this Roman law? Is this a question of Paul breaking the Roman law, or is it a question of Paul breaking some sort of religious law? Because that's going to determine who has jurisdiction over all of this. So. Right. He says, verse 8, he says, let's take a look. Neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I offended anything. So in other words, he's saying, I didn't break Jewish laws or Roman law. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So he's getting it. He's going to appeal to Caesar. So King Agrippa and Bernice show up in Caesarea. Who was Bernice? It was his sister. Bernice is King Agrippa's sister. So they come and Festus says, and I keep confusing Felix and Festus, but Festus is the one that's in charge. Festus says to Agrippa, hey, while you're here, I want you to hear this case of this Paul, because I don't really, he's appealed to Caesar, and I need to send him, and I need to send a letter with him saying what he did, but I really don't know what to write. So why do you think that why do you think Festus asked, why do you think Festus asked Agrippa's opinion on Paul's case? Do what? Yeah, he wanted his opinion. Do what? Huh? Right. So he thought that, he thought he would be better to understand it. If Agrippa is the Jewish king, then who better to understand a matter of Jewish law or Jewish religion than the king of the Jews? Also, there was perhaps something else going on here. What do you think might be going on here? Well, Paul's going to Caesar, regardless of whether Agrippa sees him or not, but he's wanting something to write to Caesar. Also, what do you do? So, let me see how I can do this. If Governor Stitt comes to Claremore to meet with the city manager, what's the city manager going to do? Probably. There you go. Fall all over himself, right? To try to make him feel welcome, to try to make him feel important. There's always a little bit of politicking that goes on. When politicians get together, politicking goes on. It just does. And so that's a little bit of what's going on here. Festus has another visiting dignitary comes. He's trying. For one thing, he for sure wants to do is to keep things peaceful between Rome and the Jews. Because what happens when things aren't peaceful between Rome and the Jews? Blood gets spilt, and he's probably thinking it could be mine. So there's some politicking going on there to try to keep, hey, I'm glad you're here. You're so smart and wise, Agrippa. I want you to hear this case and see what give me your opinion on it, because I value your opinion. There's a little bit of that going on there probably. All right, questions on those verses? All right, let's look on then to verse, let's answer the last one. What does Festus see as the true base? Oh yeah, I love this verse. What does Festus see as the true basis for the Jews' hatred of Paul? Yeah, the resurrection. If you look at verse 19, I love this is Felix talking to Agrippa. He said, when the accusers, 18, when the accusers stood up, they brought no accusation against him of such things as I supposed, but had some questions against him about their own religion and about a certain Jesus who had died, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. You get what Festus is saying. Agrippa, I didn't know. I thought the man had done something really bad. They were talking about they wanted to kill him. When I heard from their accusers, they didn't tell me anything really bad that he did. It was just some questions about their religion and some dead man that Paul claims to be alive. I mean, that was, it's interesting to see how this unbelieving governor trivializes the one thing that changed the world. And it was very much about a man who Paul claimed to be alive, that the Jews claimed to be dead, but Paul claimed to be alive. And that man who is alive today, that Jesus, is still ruffling feathers. He's still a stumbling block to those who won't believe. But he is the one who is changing the world and changing man, one heart at a time. All right, let's look on then to verse 23. So the next day, when Agrippa and Bernice had come with great pomp and had entered the auditorium with the commanders and the prominent men of the city at Festus' command, Paul was brought in. And Festus said, King Agrippa, and all the men who are here present with us, you see this man about whom the whole assembly of the Jews petitioned me, both at Jerusalem and here, crying out that he was not fit to live any longer. But when I found that he had committed nothing deserving of death, and that he himself had appealed to Augustus, I decided to send him. I have nothing certain to write to my Lord concerning him, therefore I have brought him out before you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after the examination has taken place, I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable to send a prisoner and not to specify the charges against him. Okay, so there's several clues in what Festus says that would lead us to believe that Festus believes Paul is innocent. What are some things that you see that would lead us to believe that? Yeah, I have nothing, I had no charge to write. It seems ridiculous to me. That ridiculous is my word, but he basically says it seems ridiculous to me to send a man, as a prisoner and not even write down the charge. But I don't have anything to write because I don't know what he's supposed to have done. In 18, he says, when I tried him, it was not what I supposed. I mean, these people were claiming that he deserved to die. I was expecting he was a murderer or thief or something. It was nothing like I supposed. Verse 20, he said, I didn't know what it was some question about their religion and about some dead man that Paul claimed was alive. He said, I was uncertain about such questions. I didn't know nothing. It didn't have nothing to do with Roman law. So I asked whether he was willing to go to Jerusalem to be judged, and instead he appealed to Caesar. So he's saying basically, I didn't know what they were talking about. They were trying to tell me all these charges. None of it made sense to me. In verse 25, he says he had done nothing deserving of death. And in 27, he says, I want you to talk to him because I don't know what to write. I have no charge to write. So it certainly seems as though Festus, at this point anyway, believes Paul to be innocent. So why not just let him go? That little word we talked about again, what? Politics. Politics. Who's he got to try to keep happy? It's not Agrippa he's got to keep happy. Who's he got to keep happy? Got to keep the Jews. Why did Pilate knew that Jesus was innocent. That's why he washed his hands of him. Why did he hand him over to be crucified? Got to keep the Jews happy. Jews ain't happy. Blood gets shed. And when if blood is shed, then it may end up being mine. So you got to keep the Jews happy. Agrippa seems genuinely interested in hearing Paul's case. Why? Well, there may be several reasons. Perhaps it's nothing more than curiosity. I mean, everybody loves a good story, and this sounds like a good one. I mean, I've got a man that's been held as a prisoner for 2 years with no charges against him other than he claims that a dead man is alive. Now, this is, that's better than mysteries at the museum, man. I mean, that's a good story right there. Maybe he felt it was his place. Yeah, maybe after all, if it's a question of religious laws and Jewish laws, who better to try a case of Jewish law than Agrippa, king of the Jews, right? Maybe there's something else going on, however. Maybe it's not just mere curiosity. Maybe it's conviction by the Holy Spirit. Because after, and we'll see this next time, after Paul shares his testimony, what does Agrippa say? Almost you persuade. I bet there have been 1,000,000 sermons preached off that one verse. Almost you persuade me to be a Christian. And Paul says, I would that, whether in a short time or a long time, not just you, but everybody that's hearing me could be just like I am in Christ, except for these chains. So maybe he is feeling conviction, and he wants to hear more of what Paul has to say. Now, Paul's appearance before Agrippa and Festus here is a fulfillment of prophecy. We see this in, let me just kind of direct you to it. For instance, Acts 23, verse 11. Following night, the Lord stood by him and said, "Be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome." In Acts chapter 9, verse 15, this is Paul's conversion experience. The Lord says to him, "Go, for he is this is the Lord speaking to Ananias. Go, for he is a chosen vessel of mine to bear my name before Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel." He's fulfilling all of that in one shot here. So Paul is, in fact, fulfilling the word of Christ and the prophecy of Christ. He is, at one shot, testifying before Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel, all at one shot here. All right. Questions or comments on Paul's dilemma? It's really no dilemma at all. It's all working just the way God intended it to. Do what? Festus isn't a dilemma. Festus is in the same predicament that Pilate was in. I know this man is innocent, but I'm afraid to let him go. So he wrestles with the question that ultimately we all must wrestle with. What will I do with Jesus? I mean, that's the question that every man, woman, child must wrestle with, that ultimately determines our eternal fate. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, we have a brief, I think it's about a 4-minute video.